I expected my mind, the arrogance of it just blows my mind. My arrogance.
Once hailed as the most beautiful woman in the world, Ali MacGraw had the kind of overnight stardom that burns too brightly to last. With Love Story, she became a cultural icon, not just a movie star, but a symbol of pure, poetic heartbreak. Her face was everywhere. Her presence was magnetic. Her future seemed unstoppable. But behind the ethereal beauty and sudden fame was a fragile soul. Someone unprepared for the ruthless machinery of Hollywood, and unequipped to survive the emotional cost of becoming a myth before becoming fully herself. Ali MacGraw's life wasn't built for longevity. It was built for spectacle, for longing, for temporary worship. And when the cameras turned away, as they always do, she was left with silence and regret. There were the marriages, each more heartbreaking than the last, the addiction she hid, the career that collapsed under its own weight, and the cruel truth that beauty, once worshipped, is often discarded without ceremony. Her name faded. Her pain grew. And now, at 86, the world is only just beginning to understand the sorrow behind the smile, the truth behind the myth, and the weight of being remembered for a single role while being forgotten as a woman who quietly broke down when no one was watching. This is not the story of a star who fell. It's the story of a woman who was never given the tools to survive the altitude she was thrown into. And when you hear what Ali MacGraw endured, what she lost, what she carried, and what she still lives with, you'll understand why her tragedy goes far deeper than most ever knew. There was a moment in the early 1970s when the entire world seemed to stop and stare at Ali MacGraw. With just one film, Love Story, she became more than a star. She became a phenomenon. She wasn't just beautiful, she was haunting. A kind of fragile grace clung to her like fog, and audiences projected their deepest longing onto her sad eyes, soft voice, and tragic smile. She was the embodiment of romantic sorrow, a woman whose character was doomed on screen and, tragically, not much safer off it. But Ali MacGraw's rise was never as golden as it seemed. It came suddenly, almost violently. One day she was a model, then an assistant at Vogue, and the next, she was the face of an entire generation's heartbreak. She had no training for the fame that came crashing down on her. There was no emotional armor. She had survived a tumultuous childhood with an alcoholic mother and a distant father. And just as she was beginning to find stability, Hollywood offered her a throne built on sand. The studios didn't see a woman with dreams and depth. They saw a face they could sell. Her beauty became a prison. She was adored not for who she was, but for how she looked, how she made people feel. And the more they projected onto her, the more invisible she became. No one asked if she was okay. They just wanted more of the same magic. But even at the height of her success, Ali was already unraveling. The pressure to maintain perfection, the fear of being discarded, and the deep insecurity she had carried since childhood began eating away at her from within. She married producer Robert Evans at the height of his power, but their love was more like a transaction, a merging of two golden Hollywood names than a real emotional connection. And when she left him for Steve McQueen, the most volatile, charismatic man in Hollywood, it wasn't love that saved her. It was the beginning of a new kind of suffering. McQueen didn't want a star. He wanted a wife. Quiet, obedient, invisible. So she gave up everything for him, her career, her momentum, her independence, and slipped into the shadow of his spotlight. The woman who had once commanded every headline now vanished from them entirely. And worse, she began to believe that maybe that's what she deserved. For years she lived behind closed doors, silencing her voice to keep her marriage afloat, enduring his mood swings, his controlling behavior, and the suffocating isolation that came with loving a man who couldn't love her back the way she needed. She stopped acting. She stopped speaking. She shrank. And when McQueen left her, as she feared he would, he didn't just walk away from a relationship. He walked away with the final pieces of her confidence. She was alone, forgotten by the industry she had once owned, discarded by the man she had sacrificed everything for, and staring down a life that had been written for her, but never really lived by her. At a time when most actresses were still building their careers, Ali MacGraw was already a ghost, remembered for a single role, a single image, while the real woman stood quietly in the wreckage, wondering how it had all happened so fast. After the spotlight faded and the applause died down, what remained of Ali MacGraw wasn't just a forgotten star. It was a woman quietly spiraling. The world had moved on. Hollywood, always hungry for the next face, didn't wait for her to recover, or even to ask what had happened. And what had happened was heartbreak in layers. She had walked away from Robert Evans at the peak of both their careers and thrown herself into a relationship with Steve McQueen that would soon reveal itself to be not a rescue, but a cage. McQueen didn't just want her to stop acting, he demanded it. He wanted her out of the public eye, out of her own voice, away from anything that gave her identity beyond being his. For a woman already riddled with self-doubt, that silence was suffocating. And when their marriage ended in 1978, it wasn't a clean break. It was the final collapse of everything she had sacrificed. The industry didn't come calling again. Friends had faded. She was no longer the shimmering star of Love Story. She was a cautionary tale. Alone, grieving, and broken, Ali turned inward. And what she found there terrified her. In the quiet, she began to unravel. Alcohol, pills, the seductive. Escape of addiction. It all found its way into her life, not with spectacle, but with a slow, creeping numbness. She tried to pretend she was fine. She tried yoga, meditation, spirituality, all in an effort to silence the panic that kept bubbling beneath the surface. But the weight of regret was too heavy. She regretted giving everything away for a man who never truly saw her. She regretted surrendering her identity, her power, her art. And worst of all, she regretted not speaking up sooner, not fighting harder for herself. It wasn't until the late 80s that she finally reached a breaking point. She checked herself into the Betty Ford Clinic, not for show, not for headlines, but for survival. It was there, among other women clawing their way out of darkness, that Ali finally began to speak the truth of her life. She confessed to the deep feelings of unworthiness that had haunted her since childhood, the way fame had given her validation but no stability, and how she had spent decades confusing love with obedience. The world didn't know it at the time, but Ali MacGraw was fighting for her life, not in the dramatic, cinematic way audiences once saw on screen, but in the quiet, everyday struggle of trying to forgive herself. If you've ever felt forgotten, discarded, or lost in your own silence, let us know in the comments. And if Ali's story is already touching you, please take a second to like this video and subscribe for more untold truths from Hollywood's most fragile legends. Because what Ali MacGraw went through isn't just her tragedy. It's a mirror for so many women who gave away too much to be loved, only to find themselves alone in the end. Her time in recovery didn't make her whole again overnight. There was no dramatic transformation, no glowing comeback. But what it did give her was a quiet kind of power, the strength to be alone, the courage to be ordinary, and the dignity to accept that survival sometimes looks a lot like starting over in silence. After the storm of addiction, heartbreak and abandonment had finally passed. Ali MacGraw found herself in unfamiliar territory, the quiet. Not the quiet of loneliness, she had known that all too well, but the quiet of self-rediscovery. With no career to revive, no tabloid drama to fuel, and no publicists pushing her back into the limelight, she did something few stars ever truly do. She disappeared. Not in scandal, not in disgrace, but in pursuit of something real. She left Los Angeles. She left the glitz, the chaos, the expectations, and she moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, a place where no one cared about red carpets or box office numbers. There she lived not as an icon, but as a woman starting over. She planted gardens. She meditated. She surrounded herself with animals and nature. She studied Eastern philosophy and found comfort in things that couldn't be commodified. Gone was the woman who once graced every magazine cover in America. In her place was someone smaller, softer, but far more complete. She no longer needed the validation of others. She no longer wanted to be adored. All she wanted was peace, and yet peace came at a cost. Ali was still alone. She had no partner by her side, no children to lean on, no family anchoring her to the present. Her beauty, once worshipped, had faded, at least by Hollywood standards. But in Santa Fe, she wasn't defined by age or wrinkles. She was known for her wisdom, her kindness, her quiet strength. And even as the world largely forgot her, she remembered herself. Occasionally, she would speak in interviews, soft-spoken and reflective, about the strange life she had led. She called it a dream that turned into a storm, and then into a lesson. She admitted that she had lived much of her life trying to please others, trying to fit into a mold designed for men's fantasies. She confessed that it had taken decades to realize she was never meant to be anyone's muse. She was meant to be her own truth. Her voice, though aged, had never been clearer. But there was still sadness. In those rare moments where she opened up, a quiet grief lingered just beneath the surface. Grief not just for the roles she lost, or the career that never became what it could have been, but for the time she could never get back. She had spent so much of her youth trying to survive, trying to be enough, that she missed the chance to live fully. Even now, at 86, her days are not filled with visitors or red carpets. They are filled with simplicity, morning walks, books, prayer, stillness. And in that stillness lives a haunting kind of beauty. Because Ali MacGraw, once the face of tragic love, is herself a living tragedy. A woman who gave the world her soul and was left to gather its pieces in solitude. Today, when people mention Ali MacGraw, it's often with a tinge of melancholy, as if speaking of a dream once vividly remembered now faded at the edges. She hasn't acted in a major film in over 4 decades, hasn't walked the red carpet in years, and no longer appears in glossy magazine spreads or late-night interviews. And yet her presence lingers, not just in the cultural memory of Love Story, but in something deeper, something quieter. She represents a kind of beauty we no longer see, a vulnerability that Hollywood once craved, but eventually discarded. In many ways, Ali became a ghost while still alive, a symbol of how quickly the industry can devour those it once adored. But if you listen closely to the way other actors, especially women, speak of her, you'll hear more than just nostalgia. You'll hear reverence, because Ali MacGraw wasn't just a pretty face. She was the blueprint for every young woman thrown into the spotlight too fast, too hard, with too few protections. Her tragedy is not just personal, it's systemic. She was never allowed to grow into herself on her own terms. Instead, she was packaged, promoted, and praised for things she had no control over, then punished the moment she deviated from that script. And while many actresses went on to rewrite their stories with comebacks and reinventions, Ali chose something far more radical. She walked away. That act alone was both brave and heartbreaking. In a world where fame is currency, she chose poverty of attention in exchange for peace of mind. But peace doesn't erase pain. In her few public appearances, her voice is warm, her words deliberate, but her eyes carry the distant look of someone who has lived through silence, through loss, through being forgotten. And still she holds no bitterness, only acceptance. Ali once said that she had finally learned how to love herself, not the woman the world saw, but the one who remained after everyone else left. That love came late. It came after the lights dimmed, after the men walked away, after the magazines stopped calling. But it came. And in that way, maybe her story isn't just a tragedy, maybe it's also a quiet kind of triumph. Because Ali MacGraw is still here, still standing, still breathing. And though her life may not have gone the way the headlines promised, she found something far more rare than stardom: truth. The truth of who she is, of what she survived, and of what it means to be whole without needing to be seen. As she enters the final chapters of her life, there's no major farewell tour, no final performance. Only the gentle wind of New Mexico, the rustle of the trees outside her home, and the distant hum of a world that once belonged to her, now passing by. And perhaps that's the most heartbreaking thing of all. Not that we lost her, but that we never truly saw her while she was right in front of us.